So Bullet Train is the story of Ladybug, a older and a little bit weary assassin hitman kind of character played by Brad Pitt. He is in Tokyo and he is looking to take up a new job to get back into the game. He's feeling zen. He's been to therapy and he hops aboard a bullet train to pick up a silver briefcase with a sticker on the handle and get off the train at the next stop. Very easy. He's got a handler on the phone he talks to, played by the beautiful Sandra Bullock. And he hops on the train and he gets this case and he starts working his way through the cars. But then he discovers that he's not the only assassin on this train, merely one of five, along with other individuals who all have their own plots, motive, characters, discourse, sense of humor, weapons. Everybody's got stuff going on, and it's aboard this bullet train that we begin to have this kind of almost Guy Ritchie, Tarantino-esque crime caper with action and comedy, and a little bit of fast-moving bullet train, and that's Bullet Train. In its best moments, it is, like I said, a bit like a Guy Ritchie movie. In its worst moments, yeah, some of the jokes fall flat. But I'm excited to talk about it. Andy, what did you think of Bullet Train?
Um, it was all right. It has some good moments. It has a lot of things that don't work. I for some reason was really bored in this movie, particularly in the middle. It has a long second act. It's a full 2 hours, and I remember after about the first hour, I was like, "Oh, this must be nearing the end," and I realized it had a whole another hour left. Um, it's there's too much talking. There's not enough action. And the comedy is hit and miss. There are some good jokes, there are some funny moments, and then there's a whole lot of jokes that don't land and aren't funny to anyone. And I was in a half full theater, but a lot of people are liking this movie. It's gotten a fairly positive reception. I know a few people have seen it and really enjoyed it, and so that's really great. Yeah, if people are getting enjoyment out of cinema, I never want to take away from that. I didn't really like it that much, and I thought it was a big ripoff of a lot of Quentin Tarantino and Guy Ritchie films of the 90s. I do think at this point, though, those films are 25, 30 years old almost. So there is a generation or two that may not have seen those. May not, and I'm talking about things like Pulp Fiction, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, The Gentleman. Even this movie borrows a lot from action films that came before it, and it doesn't really do it much better.
Don't sugarcoat it for us, Andy. Tell us how you really feel. No, I okay. First off, I mostly agree. I thought this movie was good. I thought it was fine. It's not bad by any means, but it rarely does anything to like rise above what other films in the genre have done better in the past. But I do appreciate that it's here. That's the thing. It is a one-off action film. It's based on a book. It's not based on a prequel. It doesn't have a sequel. It's not superhero film. Like it's its own little thing. It's got a small cast of characters who are all pretty good in the movie, and I like that it doesn't over. Well, I say 2 hours it does overstay its welcome a bit, but I do like that it's here. Like I like little one-off action comedies like this. This reminded me of Bad Times at the El Royale, which was a lot of fun. This reminds me of like a Guy Ritchie flick. The guy I went and saw it said it with it. It almost reminds him a little bit of like Knives Out, like just kind of a character-driven caper with a bunch of like individual actors with unique silhouettes who will all have their own backstories and ultimately have some violence and some action. And that stuff works well. Director David Leitch is coming from Deadpool 2. That's his last film. He is definitely an action-oriented individual, and he leans on a lot of his contacts in the industry, namely Brad Pitt, to kind of spearhead this film. I was surprised at the cast who's showing up in this film. We have Brad Pitt as our main hitman, Ladybug. We've got Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry as these two hitmen named Lemon and Tangerine, kind of a comedy duo who work probably the best in the film. Those two are a lot of fun, I think. A young Joey King as a character called the Prince. Michael Shannon is in this movie, and a couple other names. Bad Bunny was one that you.
Bad Bunny.
I don't know who that is. I've heard the name on TikTok, I think, but
I mean,
I guess
he's one of like
music,
the
right?
big
That's
biggest selling artists right now.
yes. He's in this movie. A couple other small roles from people who were in other things like Deadpool 2. For the most part, I like what's going on here. Like I like the script. It's a lot of laughs. I like the action. I like the sets. The problem is I think it's a little too long, and a lot of the ratings is not, it's not quite as funny as it needs to be. So while like it holds up the action end pretty good, its pacing and a script that's not quite as punchy as it should have been drags it down. It's currently got like a 54 on Rotten, one of those movies where critics are like one way or the other, you either like it or you don't. And I think the people that like it for its tone and like it for its, you know, the elements that it lifts and pays tribute to from older action films. The people who don't like it see it for what it is, which is, you know, yeah, middle of the road popcorn flick.
Yeah,
So
it's got
yeah,
a B plus cinema score, which I think is, you know, that's
yeah,
regular audiences, and that's,
yeah.
like I said, regular audiences are really enjoying it, and I think that that's always a good thing, even if it wasn't particularly my cup of tea. I think it's one of these things that it's less than the sum of its parts.
Mhm.
Because it has all the elements of what should be a really great action movie. You got Brad Pitt as your star, you got assassins, you got, you know, hand to hand combat, you got you know, a lot of style, you know, like I said, from Quentin Tarantino esque or Guy Ritchie esque. But it just it doesn't really work.
Yeah,
I don't think, doesn't really deliver as much as it could.
I agree. Little less than the sum of its parts. Let's get into the parts because that's an important part of what we do here. What works about this movie? Let's start with the positives. I think, like I
No,
said, I think that. Go ahead.
so some of the characters work better than others.
Yes.
Probably the two best characters, definitely not Brad Pitt. He's a bit of a weak protagonist, but Lemon and Tangerine, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson and Brian Tyree Henry, are kind of a duo. They're brothers, and they're an assassin duo, and they've worked together for a long time, and they have, you know, strong Cockney accents, right out of a Guy Ritchie films, and they're really funny. They have good banter. They kind of nip at each other, and they have good conversations with the other people they run into on the train. They're a highlight of the film. Definitely my favorite part. Uh, there's other people that everyone else is kind of forget. But unfortunately, Bad Bunny is, he's good, but he's not in the film for very long. So that I was kind of upset by that. I was hoping to see more of him. Who
Sure.
else stands out to you?
So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can see we've got the live stream up and we've got the poster on, and I can put it up a little bit bigger right here, just because think it's worth digging into. Like the poster is really everybody you've got in the movie, like in order of importance and quality. Like, you've got Brad Pitt up front, you got Aaron Taylor Johnson, Brian Tyree Henry in the second row right behind him. Following that, you've got four more characters who are a bit smaller and aren't quite as important, and then three characters at the back who are relatively important, but kind of forgettable. The problem, I think, the biggest problem with these characters is that some work, like Andy said, and some don't. And namely, Brad Pitt doesn't really work in this movie. It's a shame, right? Like, how do you make a movie that Brad Pitt doesn't work in, especially because he's worked with David Leitch on a number of features. Believe it or not, David Leitch was his stunt double for years on movies like Fight Club. Had to be in shape for Fight Club. So these two are tight. All right, they are good buddies. Dave Leitch is also the reason Brad Pitt had a guest role in Deadpool 2. So they get along great, but I think the character of Ladybug is doing this like Zen thing where he's like, peace and love, baby. We're gonna solve everything through like peace. And like
It's the
Pitt,
reformed hitman.
yes, and like Pitt doesn't quite land it. Like his delivery and what he's doing with the character doesn't quite get over the line. Like it at times I felt like he was supposed to almost be like the dude in the Big Lebowski, but like he does too much energy and he's too manic to be the dude, right? So he can't be that laid back. But it doesn't really work the other way around. Like if you've got you know, somebody who's trying to be like nice and cool, but is kind of a manic individual, like it just comes off feeling, I don't know, like they feel out of touch with the audience. Meanwhile, like Aaron Taylor Johnson, Brian Tyree Henry's Lemon and Tangerine, they're kind of pair of hitmen. Like these two are uniquely grounded, and they start the film at a huge disadvantage. They're having to find something that Brad Pitt has acquired. So the two of them are like already on the struggle bus, just trying to get by, like two guys who are just having a bad day. Whereas Brad Pitt is like this whole something, and it doesn't really work. And it's like, so your protagonist is weak, and following that, like too many characters leads to a little too much screen time. I think it's not that they have too many, it's that they spend too much time with each one. Bad Bunny gets an intro. His character has a character intro that's like 4 minutes too long, and it sounds silly, but like when the intro should have been 90 seconds and it ends up being like 5 or 6 minutes, it just like you just feel the weight of it, you know. And Andy was exactly right. Like I didn't quite check my watch in this film, but there were parts where you just feel like, okay, this should have had another pass in the editing room. This script needed a red pen one more time, you know, just a little bit of tune up. Something I did like about this film is the action. A lot of the action scenes are really good, and there's some really creative camera work inside of what's obviously a very close set on a green screen soundstage somewhere. Like the bullet train is shot. Go ahead.
Some of the action, I think, is like a lot of the stuff on the train, like a lot of the hand-to-hand combat, and some of the kind of, because they're after this case, right? And you know, there's a big, like the case changes hands several times, and what's in the case kind of gets swapped out, and that sort of thing. And there's a whole lot of MacGuffins like that that are also running around the train, changing hands.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff outside the train looks terrible because it's, you know, it has to all be done through CGI, and it's just rough.
Like I do not believe for a second they were in another country filming any of this movie. Like they were in Japan filming any of this movie. Like they probably shot this at a soundstage in London or something. It definitely leans on CGI when they're not in the train. But the stuff in the train works good. Like I think, and I don't mind movies like that, right? Like I don't mind a good drama that's like set on a plane, a bottle feature as they call it. And I think Bullet Train does a pretty good job of hanging. You know, I'm reminded of movies like, I don't know, Jodie Foster's Flight Plan, or Wes Craven's Red Eye, or Snowpiercer from Bong Joon-ho, right? Like same kind of idea. Like those movies can totally work, but it's a challenge, and the stress of some of the action is challenging to believe. There's a couple of action scenes in the quiet car where two characters are pounding on each other in a car full of people that are all being silent, and the idea is nobody can hear them, and it's like this is
that's ridiculous.
like, come on. Yeah, like the momentum of the action doesn't match like the setting of the scene, and I don't know if that was supposed to be a dig at comedy, but it just feels like bad editing, because it's like it doesn't come together the way it's supposed to be. And I feel like a lot of the jokes in this movie land that way. They just don't quite get over the hump. Some of them do. I definitely laughed. I want to say, like, there's definitely some laughs in this feature. Like I had more than a few chuckles. I enjoyed eating my popcorn watching Bullet Train. But like, yeah, if you look at it with any kind of magnifying glass, it is not. It just comes off weaker than it should.
It also just needs to be tighter. Like we need to get to that third act because they're all kind of barreling towards a destination that it seems everyone on board is going to be doomed, no matter what side you're on. And that's kind of where the third act starts. And we just need to get there sooner. It takes so long.
Yeah, and it's got
to get there.
You're absolutely right, and it's got an issue in writing as well with spoon feeding the audience. Typically, a feature like this, especially if you're going to compare it to something like Tarantino will have elements that aren't revealed to you until later in the film, right? A movie like Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction will have elements like, I don't know, the briefcase in Pulp Fiction, or Mr. Orange's motivation in Reservoir Dogs. Like, you won't find that out until later, but Bullet Train will kind of give it to you early and then remind you over the course of the film, like, hey, remember what was going on with this character? You remember when we told you this, right? This will be important later. And later in the movie, like, hey, remember when we said this? And this is simply done. It'll be through, you know, flashes, or like quick pan of the camera to a character, or like a, you know, a flash in somebody's head to a flashback of a moment earlier on the train that we already saw. But at times it starts to feel ham-fisted, and it kind of clogs a lot of scenes because they'll often be cutting back to other things we saw previously, like a rigged handgun, or at one point in the film, a snake escapes a cage and is free on the train. And I swear, over like the next 90 minutes of the film, they cut back that snake like 13, 14 times. Like just in between scenes, it'll just cut to a snake,
Oh
like slid
no,
on the ground. And we're like,
where is it gonna?
we know there's a snake on the train. Like nobody forgot that, but it feels like the studio came in and told them, hey, this is too confusing. You have to make this more obvious. Or maybe, I don't know, they got spooked in the editing room.
Yeah, there's a number of, like I said, there's a number of MacGuffins. The snake is one, the case is one. There's a couple of firearms on the train. There's a bomb on the train. There's, some other. There's some water that's been drugged with sleeping pills on the train. And this is all things that are floating around, changing hands. Some people know what they are, some people
Right.
don't.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's a few too many of
Yeah.
that as well. Which the plot is way overly complicated. Like all these people are somehow, there's like 10 of them on the train. They're all interconnected somehow. They all have complicated backstories, and it's just too much. And again, you can have a lot of people because again, that's when, if you look back at those Guy Ritchie films, Lock, Stock, or Snatch, they have like 20 colorfully named gangsters, and that's what this is taking from. But it just doesn't flow very well, or just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. It just doesn't quite do what those other movies do so well, which is take all of these errant manic elements of characters and weapons and settings and like bring them together into this like kind of beautiful dance by the end of the film, where some will live and some will die, and ultimately you'll walk away with a feeling of satisfaction that you saw something truly wild. Bullet Train doesn't quite get there. All of these elements are a lot of fun, and I will give it credit. It does make for good pacing for the most part. For the first act of this movie, you're glued to the screen because they're just introducing things. They have these clever title cards that come up with characters that also feel a little ham-fisted. The fact they have to give us title cards for everybody just to be like, you're gonna need to know who this character is. Here's their name, like, and you can look at it for 8 seconds. Like, just feels it just feels like they didn't trust their audience to be smart enough to keep up. But lots of weapons, lots of different train cars, lots of different motives, lots of different characters, like makes for a lot of good interactions. And that does keep the film moving, keeps you guessing, and you don't know where it's going. The problem is it's just a little too long. Yeah, they could have shaved 20 minutes out of this easy, and I think it would have been a little better. It just starts to feel its length by the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if it would have been 20 minutes shorter, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. Tighten it up. And because it's amazing how length will do that. You could have the same movie and not really improve anything, but if you just shorten it up and make it a quicker experience, it'll be a lot better.
Yeah. I should say, before we get quite to recommendations, I did like Bullet Train. Like I know I'm being harsh on the elements that didn't work, but we do a lot of movies here, all right? We're tough on movies sometimes. I'm sorry. Like what is important to understand is that Bullet Train is not quite as good as the films it is trying to imitate, but it is still fun, and there's not anything quite like it at the cinema right now. It is an action comedy. It's decent. It's got a good budget, decent effects. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. I told Andy, and we were talking about this last night, there's one knife fight scene where a knife flies through the air and it looks like an After Effects plugin. Like it just looks just looks bad.
Oh no.
And Pitt doesn't really work, I think, in what he's doing here. Interestingly enough, I kept thinking of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood when I was watching this, because in that movie, Pitt is all screen presence. My God, you can't look away from the man. Like he's just wearing a t-shirt and Ray-Bans and smiling a lot. And that's really, and flexing his muscles. And that's really all he's doing in that movie. He's kind of a silent protagonist. In this one, he's got so many more lines, but like it works so much worse. I think as he gets older, maybe you should just let Brad Pitt kind of do his, have the gravitas, and don't give him too much to chew on, because I'm not sure it works here.
Yeah. I don't have a whole lot more to say.
I'm running out too. All right.
struggling.
Well, let's wrap this up. Andy, would you recommend Bullet Train?
I would say save it for streaming. Unless you're a huge Brad Pitt fan, or you haven't been to the movies in a while, which I think is why a lot of people are enjoying it. If you haven't been in a while, it's probably a fun time. But if you're not super sold on it, save it for streaming. It'll still be a fun time. A lot of people are enjoying it and having a good time at the movies, and it's it is attempting to be a fun action comedy. It hits on some of those points it misses on others, but it's all right. Save it for streaming.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Say for streaming or like a matinee feature, there's not a lot of good stuff coming out in August. We Ann and I were just talking about for the show that like it's gonna be a lean couple of weeks on the program. We're gonna be looking for good stuff to watch because August is when stuff slows down and we're through summer and there's no more Top Gun Mavericks coming out for a few months, at least till we get to Oscar season. So for now, Bullet Train will continue to be in theaters. And if you got nothing to see, yeah, you need something for a date night, or I don't know, you want to go burn a couple hours in the movies, yeah, go off, go see Bullet Train. It's not going to hurt. I think a B plus is a great score for this movie. Like it's good, it's fine. Like it's not great, it's not bad, kind of right in the middle. Yeah, I think Bullet Train's good. I'll give it a one thumbs up and say watch it on streaming. And it's funny because if it had come to streaming, I think it would be getting better reception.
Yeah.
Because it would have felt a bit more grand, but in theaters it feels like just a little bit less than like what it's kind of supposed to be doing. And that's okay.